secret China doesn't want to reveal begins quietly, almost invisibly, the way most sacred things do. Think of a nation that for more than 70 years has tried, with relentless discipline, to erase God from memory. A place where classrooms teach that heaven is a myth, where politics replaces prayer, where society is built on the firm declaration that there is no higher authority than the state. And yet, right there, beneath the red banners and surveillance cameras, something impossible is unfolding. Not loudly, not on television, but in homes, in fields, in factories, in whispers after midnight. I remember the first time I heard the numbers. I was sitting across from a Chinese believer who spoke softly, as if even the walls might be listening. Again with statistics, he began with a question. Have you ever tried to stop the wind with your hands? Only later did he explain what he meant. Among the experts in statistics and sociology studying the latest data have run into a reality that human logic struggles to explain. China, the land once symbolized by the red dragon, is quietly becoming what no one expected, the largest Christian nation in history, according to projections from Purdue University, and corroborated by independent researchers. By Arsène Serge, there may be more Christians in China than in the United States, not registered, not approved, but real, breathing, believing. But the real question is not how many. The real question, the one that makes even seasoned scholars pause, is how. How can millions of people turn to Christ in a country where faith is restricted, monitored, and often punished? Who is touching their hearts when churches are shut, crosses removed, Bibles confiscated? To understand this, Chinese believers say you must stop thinking only in terms of policies and start thinking in terms of providence. They will tell you that what is happening now did not begin in the 20th century, or even the 19th. They will tell you that this land was marked, watched, and defended long before modern ideologies rose and fell. Then they take you back to moments scattered across the world. A man in white appearing to prisoners in Iran, lights descending over a church in Saitun, Egypt, and then they bring you home, deep into northern China, to a small village whose name most history books barely mention, yet whose story refuses to die. Donglu, to grasp the scale of what is happening today, you have to look reality in the face. We are not talking about guesses or exaggerations, but numbers that have unsettled the academic world. Professor Feng Gongyang, one of the most respected sociologists of religion, once laid them out plainly. On one side stands the Chinese Communist Party, powerful, organized, omnipresent, with roughly 90 million official members. On the other side stand China, Blundian, Ichenjiobite Sisserjiok. There were only about 4 million of them, scattered and vulnerable, a drop in an ocean of ideology. Today, independent estimates speak of figures that have already surpassed 100 million. Pause for a moment and let that sink in. In modern China, more people pray to Jesus Christ than those who have sworn allegiance to the ruling ideology. It is a historic overtake that few dare to name out loud. And the most astonishing part is not the number itself, but the method. There were no mass crusades, no foreign missionaries flooding the streets, no Christian television networks broadcasting day and night. In fact, this growth happened under pressure, under restriction, under fear. It is like watching a flower crack through reinforced concrete, not because the concrete became weak, but because life became un. Lem sociologists speak of a spiritual vacuum created by materialism, of a hunger left unfilled by economic growth. But Chinese believers speak of something else. They speak of protection. They speak of consecration. They speak of an ancient intervention that marked this land with a promise that no human power could erase. On the year was Ichenjiobei, China was burning with chaos. The Boxer Rebellion had erupted, a violent uprising fueled by nationalism, fear of foreign influence, and occult practices. The Boxers were not ordinary soldiers. They believed themselves invincible, hardened by rituals that promised immunity from Western bullets. Their mission was simple and brutal: eliminate every trace of Christianity from Chinese soil. Missionaries were hunted. Converts were tortured. Entire families were slaughtered for refusing to renounce their faith. The countryside echoed with terror, and in the midst of this storm lay a small, unremarkable village called Donglu, home to poor Catholic farmers whose only crime was belief. Blind. They knew the Boxers were coming. Reports spread quickly. 10,000 rebel fighters, reinforced by imperial troops, marching directly toward them. Donglu had no walls, no trained soldiers, no weapons worth naming, only a few hundred faithful, and their parish priest, Father Wu, a man whose courage did not come from strategy, but from surrender. Plans by every military calculation, Donglu would be erased by dawn. Mothers held their children tighter. Old men prepared for death. And yet something strange happened. No one fled. No one picked up arms. Instead, Father Wu took an image of the Virgin Mary and placed it on the altar. He did not give a speech about resistance. He knelt. The village followed. Voices trembling, hands shaking, they began to pray the rosary. Not politely. Not ceremonially, but with desperation, the kind that comes when you have nothing left but heaven. Beads moved through calloused fingers as the night grew darker, and the sound of marching feet drew closer. At first, the attack was exactly what they feared. Gunfire shattered the silence. Bullets tore through roofs and walls. Screams echoed in the distance. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The gunfire fell silent as if swallowed by the air itself. Soldiers froze. Every eye lifted toward the sky. The village, wrapped in a brilliance witnesses would later describe as brighter than the sun, yet gentle to look upon. A woman appeared. She was clothed in white, majestic, radiant, unmistakably regal. Many said she was dressed like an empress, not of China, but of heaven. And she was not alone. Beside her stood a figure blazing with authority. A warrior clothed in fire, whom the villagers would later identify as Saint Michael, the Archangel. Together, they hovered above Donglu, forming a barrier no human weapon could penetrate. The Boxers, men who boasted of mystical power and invulnerability, were seized with terror. Some fell to their knees. Others screamed and raised their rifles, firing wildly at the apparition. And this is where the story moves beyond legend into testimony. Bullets passed through the light as if through empty air. None struck the village. None reached their target. It was as though an invisible wall surrounded Donglu. A shield formed not of stone but of grace. Down in that moment, the false powers the Boxers trusted collapsed. Fear overtook fury. Discipline dissolved into chaos. 10,000 armed men fled in disordered retreat before a village of unarmed farmers whose only defense had been prayer. That day, Mary did not simply save a village. She planted a memory into the soil of China. News of the event spread quietly, carried by survivors, whispered from mouth to mouth. Official records tried to dismiss it. Authorities attempted to bury it. But stories like this do not die easily. They live in scars, in songs, in the faith of children not yet born. Years later, Donglu would face persecution again. Churches would be destroyed. Images smashed. Believers arrested. Yet the villagers rebuilt, again and again, convinced that what had once been defended by heaven could never truly be taken by earth. and fast forward to the present. And you begin to see the echoes. In cramped apartments, families gather late at night, curtains drawn, phones silenced. Someone reads from a handwritten gospel. Someone else keeps watch. In labor camps, prisoners whisper prayers into the dark. In universities, students who have never owned a Bible dream of a man in white who calls them by name. One woman, now elderly, once described her first encounter with Christ not through a preacher, but through a dream of a radiant woman standing at her doorway, saying only, "Do not be afraid." Another man spoke of reading about Donglu as a child and feeling, without understanding why, that China was not abandoned, only hidden, bland. This is how the underground church understands its own existence. Not as rebellion, but as remembrance. They believe that long before policies were written and borders drawn, heaven had already claimed this land. They believe that what began with an apparition above a small village continues, now in millions of quiet conversions. No statistic can fully capture, And so the numbers keep rising, not because Christianity is tolerated, but because it is needed. Not because it is promoted, but because it appears again and again in dreams, in moments of despair, in places where no missionary could ever go. Bells. The secret China doesn't want to reveal is not simply that Christianity is growing. It is that once, when an army marched and destruction was certain, heaven intervened. And that intervention, believers say, never truly ended. It only went underground, waiting for a time when concrete walls and digital surveillance would prove just as powerless as rifles aimed at the sky. She did not appear as a stranger. That is what the elders of Donglu always emphasize when they speak in hushed voices. When memory overtakes fear, she did not descend as a foreign queen or an abstract symbol. She appeared dressed as one of them, clothed like a Chinese empress, her presence carrying both familiarity and authority. Later, when the official image was painted, artists struggled to capture what witnesses felt more than saw, that heaven had chosen the language, the culture, and the face of the people it came to protect. Blenged. Those who passed the story down say her words were simple, almost disarming in their tenderness. "I am one of you," she said. "I am your mother." Not a statement of power, but of belonging. Not a command, but a claim. In that moment, many believe a flag was planted in the spiritual soil of China, not of conquest, but of adoption. But history teaches us that the enemy does not accept defeat quietly. If bullets fail, memory is attacked. If faith survives, symbols are targeted. In the decades that followed the miracle at Donglu, pressure mounted steadily, like a tide that never fully receded. By the time the Cultural Revolution erupted, it was no longer enough to suppress belief quietly. Faith itself had to be humiliated, erased, right into an object of shame. Blemst. The shrine built at Donglu to remember the apparition did not fall by accident. It was razed to the ground deliberately. Stones were broken, statues smashed, images burned. Pilgrimages were declared illegal. Even the name of the village became something officials preferred not to hear, spoken aloud. To remember was to resist, and resistance, even spiritual, could not be tolerated, And yet, memory has a stubborn way of surviving. Even today, every month of May, when devotion to the Virgin Mary traditionally intensifies, authorities often surround Donglu with checkpoints. Police vehicles line the roads, barricades appear overnight, temporary bans are announced, signs warn against unauthorized gatherings. From the outside, it looks like control. From the inside, It feels like fear because despite the blockades, people still come. They do not arrive in buses singing hymns. They arrive alone or in pairs. They take back roads that do not appear on maps. They cross fields under cover of darkness, wade through shallow rivers, and walk for miles through wooded paths, just to reach the place where heaven once touched earth. They come to light a single candle, to kneel for a few minutes, to whisper a prayer that history tried to silence. And why do they do it? Because for them, the supernatural did not fade into legend. It became history, and history, once lived, cannot be undone. The spirit that protected Donglu did not disappear with the shrine. It moved inward. It taught believers how to survive without monuments, without permission, without applause. Delange. That same spirit of quiet resistance flows directly into the reality of the Chinese church today. Donglu is the symbol, but daily life is the testimony. To understand Christianity in China, one must first understand that there are two realities existing side by side, rarely touching, never fully merging. And there is the patriotic church, visible, regulated, controlled. Sermons are reviewed. Scripture is interpreted through approved lenses. Crosses are sometimes removed or replaced with national symbols. In many places, minors under 18 are forbidden to enter. Faith is allowed, but only as long as it does not challenge loyalty, only as long as it does not burn too brightly, And then there is the other church, the one that does not appear on official lists, the one without registration numbers or legal addresses. The underground church, often called the house church, though many of its gatherings take place far beyond homes. This is the true backbone of Chinese Christianity. Millions of believers gather in private apartments with the curtains drawn, in unused offices after working hours, in factories once the machines fall silent, in basements, storage rooms, and rural homes where the walls are thin and the nights are long. They do not have cathedrals of stone, they are cathedrals of people. Every gathering is fragile. Every meeting carries risk, and yet they continue. This is where modern miracles quietly unfold, not the kind announced on billboards, but the kind shared in whispers and tears. In rural areas where hospitals are far away or unaffordable, testimonies circulate of sudden healings after communal prayer. A child's fever breaks when doctors had given up. A woman crippled by pain stands and walks. A man tormented by nightmares and despair finds peace after calling on the name of Jesus. Many who were raised in strict atheism say they came to faith, not through argument, but through witness. They saw a neighbor healed. They watched someone freed from spiritual oppression they could not explain. They observed courage where fear should have lived, and curiosity slowly turned into belief. And there is also a quiet miracle unfolding in the cities. In Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and other urban centers, it is not the poor or uneducated who are converting in large numbers, but intellectuals, university students, scientists, and young professionals. They have money, they have careers, they have access to everything the new China promises. And still, something is missing. They search for meaning late at night, scrolling through censored internet spaces, following half-buried links. A Bible is shared via Bluetooth, passed from phone to phone like contraband hope. The gospel is read in secret, often for the first time, and lives change. Not dramatically at first, but decisively. Values shift, priorities reorder, fear loosens its grip. An underground pastor, whose name remains hidden for safety, once summarized the reality with a clarity that cuts through ideology. The government thought it could suppress us by closing churches. He said, they did not understand that the church is not the building. The church is us. The more they scatter us, the more we carry the seed elsewhere. Blenja, his words echo the earliest days of Christianity, when persecution did not extinguish faith but multiplied it. What appears as control from above becomes, on the ground, dispersion. And dispersion, in spiritual terms, often leads to growth. Palend. This brings us back again to the beginning, to why this story matters now, far beyond China's borders. It reveals something unsettling and hopeful at the same time. While many in the West live with religious freedom and empty churches, there are believers elsewhere who risk social standing, careers, family relationships, and sometimes prison simply to own a Bible or gather in prayer. And the apparition at Donglu, in Ichenjolbat, was not an isolated interruption of history. For Chinese believers, it was a promise made visible. The woman in white who protected her children from bullets then is believed to protect their faith. Now, shielding it from forces that seek to suffocate it. In Ichenjolbat, long before the current projections and headlines, bishops consecrated the Chinese people to Our Lady of China. At the time, it seemed symbolic, perhaps even hopeful beyond reason. A century later, that consecration appears to be resurfacing in ways no one could have planned or controlled. Bond forecasts now suggest that if current trends continue, the future of Christianity will speak Chinese, not as a political movement, not as a cultural export, but as a lived faith forged under pressure. Some even whisper that from China may come a new wave of evangelization, one that flows outward toward a weary and forgetful West, reminding it of what belief looks like when it costs something. Plunder. It is a paradox woven throughout sacred history, the weak confounding the strong, the persecuted carrying the fire, the hidden becoming the foundation. In China, walls rise, cameras watch, laws tighten. And still, doors open where none should exist. Faith moves where it is forbidden to stand still, where human systems build barriers. Believers speak of openings. Where hatred is taught, conversion spreads quietly. Where silence is enforced, prayer finds another language. And beneath it all, like an underground river that cannot be dammed, the work continues, unseen, but unstoppable. Kenged. The final layer of this story does not unfold in archives or ruins, but in living faces, in ordinary people whose faith has become a quiet act of defiance and a daily miracle. To understand where China is heading, you must listen not only to numbers or prophecies, but to testimonies that rarely leave the country, stories carried like fragile lamps through darkness. Blonde. There is a woman in Hebei province who still keeps a small hand-copied prayer tucked inside her coat. She is a grandmother now, her hair silver, her hands marked by years of labor. When she was a child, her parents whispered stories about Donglu at night, stories they never dared repeat in daylight. She did not fully understand them then. She only knew that there was a mother who had once appeared, and that this mother did not abandon her children when the world turned against them. Decades later, during a period of intensified crackdowns, her son was detained for hosting a prayer meeting in their home. When fear threatened to consume her, she did not argue with God. She lit a candle in secret and prayed the same rosary. Her parents once prayed, convinced that the protection promised long ago still reached into the present. In another city, far from rural villages and shrines, a young software engineer tells a different kind of story. Raised to believe religion was a relic of weakness, he encountered Christianity not through tradition, but through exhaustion. Success came early, money followed, and yet sleep became impossible. Anxiety pressed on him like a weight he could not explain. One night, scrolling aimlessly, he came across a censored fragment of the gospel shared anonymously. He read it not as scripture, but as literature. Still, something in the words unsettled him. Weeks later, he dreamed of a woman clothed in light who stood silently, her presence calm but firm. He did not know her name. He only knew that when he woke, the fear that had ruled him for years had loosened its grip. It would be months before he connected the dream to the stories of Our Lady of China. Danged stories like these multiply quietly. They do not appear on state media. They are not recorded in official histories. But they form a living network of belief that stretches across provinces, social classes, and generations. In this network, Donglu is not merely a place on a map. It is a reference point, a reminder that faith in China has never depended on permission. Dawned. The pressure has not lessened in recent years. Surveillance technology has grown more sophisticated. Facial recognition appears at church doors. Online gatherings are monitored. Regulations shift constantly, making legality a moving target. Yet believers adapt the way water adapts to obstacles. Prayer meetings change locations weekly. Scriptures are memorized so they cannot be confiscated. Children learn hymns without knowing they are hymns, absorbing faith through melody before doctrine. Monde. What astonishes outside observers is not just that Christianity survives under these conditions, but that it deepens. Suffering has stripped it of cultural comfort. There is no casual attendance, no social advantage. To believe is to choose, again and again, with eyes open. And this choice, repeated millions of times, shapes a church that is lean, resilient, and fiercely alive. Many pastors speak of a coming shift, not in numbers alone, but in influence. They believe the Chinese church is being prepared, refined through hardship, for a role it does not yet fully understand. Not dominance, not power, but witness. A faith tested by fire has little patience for superficiality. It remembers Donglu not as nostalgia, but as proof that heaven acts decisively when all human options fail. Dance. There is also a growing sense among believers that the story is coming full circle. The same land that once received missionaries from the West may one day send believers back, not with programs or institutions, but with testimony forged in persecution. They speak of a faith that does not rely on buildings, budgets, or freedom, because it was born without them. Older Christians sometimes say that when Mary appeared dressed as a Chinese empress, she was not merely protecting a village. She was declaring that China itself was not excluded from God's plans, that its culture, history, and suffering were seen and embraced. This belief sustains many who face daily pressure to conform outwardly while guarding faith inwardly. When the image of Donglu, though officially discouraged, still circulates in private, small prints are hidden in drawers. Digital copies are in. For believers, the image is not a talisman, but a reminder. Heaven once intervened openly, and though it now works more quietly, it has not withdrawn. Banda's projections point toward Arsene Ling's sensors and beyond. Analysts debate whether China will truly become the largest Christian population on Earth. Believers themselves speak less about dates and more about fidelity. They measure growth not only in conversions, but in endurance. They know the cost of belief may rise before it falls, and still they remain. What emerges from this final chapter is not triumphalism, but paradox. A church restricted yet expanding, a faith suppressed yet spreading, a people watched closely yet guided by something unseen. The same pattern that played out in Donglu, when visible force was halted by invisible authority, now plays out across a nation in slow motion. But in the end, the secret China struggles to contain is not simply numerical. It is spiritual. It is the reality that faith, once awakened, does not retreat easily, that when belief takes root in suffering, it grows downward as much as upward, anchoring itself when no decree can reach a land. The woman who crossed fields at night to light a candle in Donglu, the student who read the gospel on a shared phone, the grandmother who prayed while her son was detained, all belong to this unfinished story. A story that began with an apparition in the sky and continues now in millions of hidden lives, moving steadily, quietly, toward a future no wall can fully block.